Hey everybody, Josh from Zombie Smith here. I get asked a lot about how miniatures are made. I think there's a lot of people under there that don't understand the process. And I also get a lot of questions about the fact that I made my own equipment. My father and I made my equipment. So this video is going to show you both the process of how miniatures are made, how they're cast, and also give you a little tour of my machinery. A few caveats: this was shot over a couple weekends. Some of the stuff is going to have this wide-angle lens. It's a helmet cam. Some of it's going to have maybe some fuzzy iPhone video, which you're looking at right now. And some of it will probably have some traffic noise in the background. So the first thing we're going to do is the casting. So for those of you here for the do-it-yourself stuff, that's going to be at the end of the video. Thanks. Alright guys, this is a master mold. I often get asked the difference between a production mold and a master mold. So we'll start here with the master mold. The first thing you see is it's green, and that's because it's a silicon rubber rather than an organic rubber, so it's man-made rather than natural. And at this point in my pipeline, I get most of my master molds made with Storafigs. He could work with this silicon rubber, which is a lower temp rubber, which is milder on the figures. You don't run as much risk of destroying your green masters as you do with a normal high temp organic rubber mold. So the only real difference functionally between a master mold and a production mold is that in the master mold you only have one of each pose. This is where you actually put your masters, so you're only going to have one of each. So this is 3 different Quar cavalry models, some Quar upper bodies, and some Quar legs. There's really only one of each pose in there. Now a production mold, I'm going to show you in a second, will have multiple poses of each. So one production mold might have this same cavalry body 6 times. It might have these legs 18 times. It really depends. But this is a master mold. You see a lot going on in there. A lot of cuts and gates. I'll explain that in the next chunk while we look at a production mold. Okay, let's start by looking at a mold. This is a 9-inch diameter mold. They come in 12, probably even an 18. In my equipment, I can only run 9-inch molds. You can see this is a spin casting mold, centripetal casting mold. You guys are probably more used to, say, a resin mold with a gravity pour, but this is a mold that fills from the middle out. We load it in a spin casting machine, and obviously it turns, and that's what this hole is for the metal to enter. But we'll look at that in a second. First, let's just talk about the actual mechanics and physics of the mold. 2 halves here. We got the bottom, we've got the top. The first thing to think about and to keep in mind when looking at this mold is that because the metal enters from the middle, it fills, right, and it's spreading out. It actually fills the mold from the outside in. If that makes sense, right? You can think of the metal sort of filling in towards the center as you pour. So we have 2 kinds of cuts in this mold. You can see there are gates, which are channels to our figures, and then there are vents, which are these channels out away from our figures. So let's talk about the vents. So because we're filling from the outside in, that metal is filling, if you've got little bits that poke off like the bayonets in these rifles, that metal might just pass them by as it fills. So what you do is you vent out to the edges of your mold so that your air travels. So as the metal fills and displaces the air, you create basically a small vacuum, and it's going to pull the metal towards this vent, and that'll help fill out these bayonets that otherwise are super thin and super hard to fill out. You can see another type of vent is coming off the back of all of the bases of the figures here, and that's because as the metal travels through this gate and fills up, you're going to block the back half of the figure where these gates are. So if you gate, or vent rather, off the backs of these bases, the Quar bases around, to make them sort of difficult, then that pulls, as this pulls back, it's going to pull some of the metal towards those vented areas before it fills back into the gate. So what I normally do is I normally gate in the bottom and vent in the top. For some reason I didn't do this here. This looks like it's gated, but this is just discoloration from the mold. This is actually flat. There's no cuts here. Hot metal never touches these flat spaces, so they're a normal color, and these are just discolorations from the hot metal coming up against it. The other thing you can see there are these lock nuts that help lock the mold in place so it doesn't shift and torque and you get bad mold lines. The other thing I do is you can see this here, I notch it so it's easy to line up the mold. Oh, there's one other type of vent actually. Let's look at the bottom here. So because the base is around on the Quar figures and the metal needs to travel up and back down, right, in these directions, which is also against the direction of spin, I take a Dremel with a sewing needle and I vent, I drill through and I vent back out towards the top or the bottom, cut a little hole to widen that out, and then vent it out to the side. So that also will pull the metal into that round base and fill it up. Look at a couple other molds here. Sorry for the mess on my table. This is some Quar 15mm production mold here. So there's a lot going on. With the smaller figures, I tend not to gate straight into them to give a break in the metal speed. Now a lot of casting machines will have a variable speed that will help you with this, but I don't because my system is home built. So my easy fix for that is just to provide some extra brakes for speed to fill up these small parts. Otherwise you'll get a lot of flash. It overwhelms them. There's that one. This is a head mold, the Quar. You see this one actually doesn't take a lot of venting because all the pieces are basically in the direction that metal would travel, so they fill perfectly. Let's talk about that back in the first one. That's a good point I forgot. So I try to angle the figures in the direction that the metal is actually flowing so that it fills out that way. But then you can see the vents, say off this bayonet here, come back and then out. And that's because air will travel there, but the metal will have a harder time traveling there because that's the metal spinning. It wants to go this way. And so we're trying to, the air vent comes back this way so that the metal doesn't actually just flow straight out. If I cut that vent straight out to the side, then metal will just go straight out of the sides of the mold. You're going to get a little bit of that anyway. I tend to cut my vent sometimes a little wide, so I'll get a little spray of metal, and you'll probably see that when we're casting. It's a very tiny spray of metal, not a big deal. But again, that's why we cut these back and away and against the grain of travel. You can see this one here is not cut correctly, so I probably get a little metal out of here because this one's going out and with the direction of the metal flow. Great. That's the basics of the mold. Next thing we'll do is we'll throw one of these in the caster and spin it up. Alright, the helmet cam is on, safety glasses are on. Let's run this mold. So this is the mold from earlier we're looking at. Load up the caster. I'm currently using wing nuts. Not the most efficient way, but for what we're doing right now, they work fine for me. Basically get them equally hand tight. Don't need to over tighten. Just provide equal pressure. Glove. So ladle, a little first person casting. Get the machine on. Nice good scoop. And pour. Nice even flow. Turn it off, let it spin down. Take our wing nuts off. Can't perform on camera here. Pull the plate off. Now normally I let this cool a little bit, but we're going to go ahead and pop it open now for the sake of time. And there you go. Some Quar bodies. These happen to come off the sprue, not a big deal. And then all you have to do is you pop the bodies off, you take this part here, you remelt it, and you are good to go. there you go. Alright, for the do-it-yourself crowd, this is my casting machine. It's ugly, yes, there's some cardboard and some duct tape, some plexiglass and some duct tape, and even just some plain old paper and some duct tape as a shield. Because truth be told, it looks like it's a mess in here, but this is years of buildup. And now and then I scrape the bigger chunks off, so it looks scarier than it really actually is. That's why you wear safety glasses, and anything that actually hits you is not hot, it's more kinetic, right? It's the force of it, and even then, like I said, it's a light sprinkling, so this looks much worse than it actually is. The first thing you can see is there is a welded steel frame, pretty simple, with a crossbar here that a 1/6 horsepower capacitor start motor is mounted to. You can see the bottom here, there's a pulley then that connects to the spin plate, which you saw in use when I spun the mold up earlier. This was really the harder part to make because this needed to be cut round. It's a 1/4 inch steel. Sorry, not a 1/4 inch. It's 3/16 steel. Nice and solid. I'm going to see if I can get the camera under here so you can see the pulley. Can you see the pulley? Okay, that didn't work. Sorry. Turn it on and off here with a plain old light switch. I've heard that you need reverse, you need multi-speed, and I think that's probably true if you're running a lot of molds that aren't your own. But since I know how my machine runs, I can cut and gate my molds so they run mostly perfectly every time. So I don't really need a variable speed or a reverse. And you see here, I just use these Lee Magnum melter pots. I might have showed this in the other section, but here I am showing you again. They hold about 20 pounds of pewter each. There's the big pile of pewter. Here's a bunch of my molds up against the wall here. More stacked over here because these are the ones I'm currently running. The other thing you'll see is it's a mess. But I know where everything is, I swear. Okay, in just a second, I'm going to show you my Vulcanizer. Alright guys, now, just make a space here. We're going to talk about my mold Vulcanizer. So this is a big, heavy donut of metal. The bottom is welded on here. This is a stainless steel. This is, I don't know, 3/8 thick. It's a big fat ring. Here's the top of it. Actually, upside down. This is the top. So normally what I do is take a couple of big washers and my bolt. It's hard to do this one-handed. The bolts actually come all the way up through the mold. The top will go on, and they'll run 4 of those all the way around. And then I've got these 4 giant C-clamps. That I basically put on the 4 quadrants of the mold. Then I put it in the oven, obviously with the mold in it, at 320 degrees for about 2 hours. I don't know if 2 hours is the right amount of time, but that's the time I run it. And then I usually run these at night after dinner, and I let them cool in the oven until the next day. So that extra cooling is actually, the mold is still going to be cooking because it's going to be hot in there. It takes a long time for the metal to dissipate the heat. So it might actually cook for a little longer than 2 hours, but whatever happens, it works for me. I can quickly put this together. So one of the first things I always do is put a piece of mold paper on the bottom so that the mold does not stick to the bottom, to make it easier to get out of there. And then these are some raw organic rubber mold halves. You'll sandwich this in there. You're going to lay your figures out, your acorn nuts around this outer edge that you saw earlier so the mold doesn't shift. The reason I put the paper in is you can see it's a really tight fit. I have to actually push the mold down into there, and then the top will go on. There's a plug that goes in the middle and the top. And I'll score with a X-Acto knife the top of the mold, which will stick to the top of this metal plate when I pop it off, and that way the mold doesn't get stuck in the can. Every now and then the mold gets stuck in the can, but I just pry it out with a butter knife. It's really not that big a deal. So this is, while the machine looks difficult, this is a more difficult thing to do yourself. This is going to take a machine shop, which I had access to, my father, and it's going to take somebody who can weld stainless steel, somebody who can cut this, somebody who can cut this piece. The top and bottom of this are basically the same size as the spin plate you saw on the caster to make it all easy. So there were just 3 discs cut. I think there's a 4th somewhere. But there were 3 discs cut and then ground down to fit in here. That's the Vulcanizer. Super simple design, but I think the hardest thing you're going to have in a do-it-yourself situation. Alright guys, the last part here I just want to talk about a couple of questions I often get asked that I didn't cover in the video. I usually get 8 to 10 28mm figures per mold. I usually get 20 to 25 15mm figures. A lot of people think you can get more, but they're a little hard to gate and vent because they've got little small parts. Based on those mold sizes, I can usually cast about 200 figures per hour. On Sundays, my nephew Jackson comes over, and with 2 people, it literally doubles the output. So sometimes we get 3, 4, and even 500 figures per hour out of the setup. No, I will not put on the helmet cam and film your order unless you pay me a lot of money. And lastly, if you guys have any other questions about things I didn't cover or didn't cover in enough depth, just email me or post it in the comment section below. Thank you.